Hello, today we're going to be talking about different types of research that we're going to be using for our argumentative writing in the research paper. Now, we've talked so far about how to go about finding research, right? So we know where to look for it, library databases, etc. But now we need to start thinking about what exactly are we looking for in these sources to be able to utilize in our paper to support the positions we're going to take. Textual evidence is important, of course, but what exactly is it that we're quoting and paraphrasing? That's what we're going to talk about today. So first of all, one type of evidence that you can find that can be very measurable comes from experiments. But there are a few things that we want to keep in mind when we're dealing with experiments. The first one is variables, okay? Which maybe is conjuring up ideas of algebra for you, but when we're talking about variables, we're talking about things that change. And the fewer variables in an experiment, the better. If there's only one variable, it's easier to trace the effect of that thing that is changing. I'm going to give you a couple examples. One of them has to do with something called unschooling. I actually had a student who wrote about this topic a while back. This is the idea of pulling your students out of traditional school, teaching them yourself. And according to some of the research the student found, the students who were pulled out of school and taught at home were more likely, statistically, to end up in STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, math, those types of jobs. Now, if the only difference, on average, between the students in traditional schools and in unschool situations was whether or not they were in school, this would be pretty clear evidence that, yeah, being in regular school is not the best path. However, another piece of evidence that came out in the research was that more of the parents who are doing this unschooling, they themselves happen to be in STEM fields. So another variable is that these students also are more likely to have STEM educated parents, and that is certainly a variable that would impact whether they themselves go into those fields. So since multiple variables are coming into play, both whether or not they're in school, but then also what their home life is like, it's really hard to trace the effect of just unschooling, not taking into account that being at home with an engineer parent is a lot different than being home with a parent who does not have a similar background and similar knowledge to be able to teach you those higher level things. Another example I bring up is actually from ECC, Elgin Community College. Recently, the college won a lot of accolades because the achievement rates of the Latina population has actually improved over the last few years, which is wonderful. However, when somebody looked to our programs to try to figure out what exactly had caused that benefit, it was hard to answer because so many initiatives had been put into place. And when you're trying 5 different things, and something's working, it's hard to pinpoint what exactly is the variable that is causing the success rate. So it's always important to make sure that you are looking at as few variables as possible if you want to get a clear answer. Another thing that we can look at is statistics. People obviously like statistics, they use them a lot, but as with all things, we have to make sure we're using them appropriately. One thing that we need to deal with is the size of a sample. So how many people are being asked a question, for instance, or how many people are being measured, and also the manner of finding data. Now, one particular type of statistic that comes up a lot is polling. And the way that polling works is they ask a small group of people their attitude about something or whether they do something, and then they reason that that answer is the same for the same percentage of the larger group. Now, if you are asking 2 people and then you get a 50% answer for how they feel about something, clearly that does not give you an overall view. But if you were to ask, say, several thousand people, that might give you a good indication of the general attitudes about a topic at the nation at large. Now, of course, sometimes polling doesn't work when you don't find the data in an appropriate manner. For instance, if you look to the 2016 presidential election, most analysts and pollsters said that Hillary Clinton was going to win the election. Clearly, Donald Trump won the election, and there was a lot of questioning of the next day of why that is. Well, there's many reasons, but some of the ones that have been pointed to, and I encourage you to actually look into this. It's a fascinating topic. But some of the theories that have been posted is that the way they try to find data for who people are going to vote for is faulty. For instance, some people may not be honest when asked who they're going to vote for whatever reason. For instance, there might have been people who did vote for Trump, but maybe did not say they were going to when polled. There's also problems with who is getting called, and is it a representative sample that's being called? Because if it's not, if it doesn't represent the whole electorate and people who actually came out to the polls, then the poll is going to give you a inaccurate picture. So make sure if you're citing any statistics, you're paying attention to the size of the sample and the manner of finding data. In other words, always ask where sources are getting their information from, how they're arriving at these numbers, instead of just accepting it as truth without any questions. Another thing to consider with experiments is the size of a sample, the manner of an experiment, bias, etc. This is similar to polling, but this is when we're talking about actual experiments being put into place, and a lot of these have to do with social sciences for our topics, but other experiments are important too. We've already seen one experiment talked about in the Ronson book that had to do with the prison experiment, if you'll recall, from Stanford, where the problem was that because the prisoner and guard students knew what they were supposed to do, there's some people saying that they played the role instead of accurately portraying what would happen in a prison experiment. So that's an issue of the manner of the experiment. When people know what's happening, it doesn't work as well. And that can lead to bias on the part of the people in the experiment, which of course doesn't lead to great evidence. However, another example, what I'm referring to shortly as a hallway experiment, takes that out and actually gives a little bit more of a true experiment of how people act because people did not know what was being measured. I want to share this example from you, and this is characterized in another interesting book by another writer similar to Ronson. That's Malcolm Gladwell, who he actually mentions in his book. This is how he describes it in his book, Outliers. The experiment went like this. The Social Sciences building at the University of Michigan has a long, narrow hallway in the basement lined with filing cabinets. Young men were called into the classroom one by one and asked to fill out a questionnaire. Then they were told to drop off the questionnaire at the end of the hallway and return to the classroom, a simple, seemingly innocent academic exercise. For half of the young men, that was it. They were the control group. For the other half, there was a catch. And this is where the actual experiment is taking place. As they walked down the hallway with their questionnaire, a man, a confederate of the experimenters, walked past them and pulled out a drawer in one of the filing cabinets. The already narrow hallway now became even narrower. As the young men tried to squeeze by, the confederate looked up, annoyed. He slammed the filing cabinet drawer shut, jostled the young men with his shoulder, and in a low but audible voice said the trigger word, asshole. The results were unequivocal. There were clear differences in how the young men responded to being called a bad name. For some, it changed their behavior. For some, it didn't. The deciding factor in how they reacted wasn't how emotionally secure they were or whether they were intellectuals. Any guesses? Or jocks, or whether they were physically imposing or not. What mattered, I think you can guess where this is heading, was where they were from. Most of the young men from the northern part of the United States treated the incident with amusement. They laughed it off. Their handshakes were unchanged. Their levels of cortisol actually went down as if they were unconsciously trying to diffuse their own anger. But the Southerners, oh my, they were angry. Their cortisol and testosterone jumped. Their handshakes got firm. Call a Southerner an asshole and he's itching for a fight. And that's from, as I said, Malcolm Gladwell, Outliers. Now, there's clearly a potential bias in that study that you can argue about the validity of it. However, I think it's very interesting in that they did not tell the young men what was being measured. That's the kind of experiment that usually works a little bit better to get true answers, as opposed to asking them whether or not they get upset by a word, which would be more like the prison experiment. So once again, when you're looking at an experiment, pay attention not only to the results, but just as importantly, pay attention to how the experiment has been put into place, how they arrived at the data. Another type of experiment that does this even better is what are called natural experiments. And these are experiments that just happen based on circumstances changing. An example of this actually measured class size. One school in Connecticut actually had, just based on normal population shifts, went from having a class size in their school of around in the 20s to dropping down into the low teens. Nothing else changed from one year to the next except for class size. The teacher was the same and the curriculum was the same. The community was roughly the same. So they were able to look and say, if everything is the same except for class size, does class size impact the outcome? Because a lot of people think it does. Smaller class size, a lot of people believe, leads to much better learning. This particular experiment, once again, you can challenge these things based on other experiments. But according to this natural experiment, the class size did not have much of an impact. In fact, the educational outcomes ended up being about the same from having a slightly larger class size to a smaller class size. So this is, again, not something that was forced. This was not contrived. They didn't go into a classroom and say, well, we're going to have this class only have 10, this class is going to have 25 students, and we'll see what happens. No, it just happened to naturally happen that way, so people were able to measure it and make some interesting conclusions. So that's another type of experiment that works quite well if you can find them. And finally, the other type of research to consider are what are called case studies. We saw plenty of these in So You've Been Publicly Shamed with people like Justine Sacco, Lindsay Stone, etc., Adria Richards, Jonah Lehrer. These are focused on an individual case, person, or other situation in detail. Now, obviously, this has a benefit because then we get to see the extent of something in much greater detail than a general survey or a statistic, but at the same time, it's not representative of a large group. If I say a certain percentage of 1,000 people are a certain way or have a certain characteristic, that covers a much larger area, but that's also not in depth. So you have to take that into account. And that's also why having multiple types of research, maybe having case studies and those general experiments in your essay, is the best bet. So as you're looking for your research for your annotated bibliography, be sure to pay attention to things like how information is being found. How is it being contrived for, experiments, statistics, etc.? Is the information reliable? You still want to pay attention to those features of currency, credibility of the author, where it's published, accuracy of information, as always. You want to make sure that you're then thinking about how does that articulate the points you're trying to make in your essay. If you do that, you're going to have a much more successful research paper, one that's backed up with good solid evidence that's also clearly articulated to prove your point.